like to first acknowledge that we're on the lands of the Kwassamsun and Lekwungen peoples, and this is where we get to learn. And I think we're very honored to be here and to enjoy this wondrous place, particularly on a day like today. And we get to listen to a person who is coming from another wonderful part of Vancouver Island. Dr. Laura Loucks is someone who I met back in 2014 for the first time, and I'll let her tell her story when she comes up. But I've been able to work with Laura along with Dr. Brian White and one of our former students from the MA in Tourism Management, a student by the name of Kathy Fick, back then. Laura is going to take us on a journey this afternoon that tells a story from 2014 to present day and what's being achieved. And this is where the School of Environment and Sustainability comes in. Because it's one of these ironic things. About 6 months ago, I learned that the School of Environment and Sustainability was actually doing and implementing what we were planning and discussing back in 2014. So it was really quite a unique story of how two schools, both with great intent, have been working together without even knowing it, which is maybe something typical of Royal Roads, in that we're all doing good things, and we're just trying to collaborate even more. I think that's where Laura has been that bridge for us, right? She's able to tell the story from two perspectives. One about the role of planning and the future of sustainability in tourism, and then the other side about the importance of environmental education and the work that's going on in her area. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Laura. So welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much, Jeff. And I would like to acknowledge Dr. Rick Kuhl, who also has a long history with this place and was a high school teacher in Ucluelet, and a really big part of how we were able to sow the seeds of education tourism on the West Coast. And Dr. Brian White spent a long time on the West Coast documenting quite a controversial history, which is really a key part of this story. It was a pivot point in time, and I hope to kind of do justice to the work these collaborators have shared with me. So let's begin. Idea to implementation. This is kind of a long story, but many of you perhaps are new to this part of the world, and I hope to show you a little bit about the West Coast and the complexity. And part of that complexity is that many of us are more recent guests to this land, and this is the traditional land of the Nuu-chah-nulth people who've been there for thousands of years. So this story is really about convergence of cultures and place and conflict and finding a new pathway. So there's 3 guiding questions that I've used to shape the story this afternoon, and hopefully you'll find some meaning in your own interests in your study of tourism. I'm new to some of the literature in tourism, so many of you can perhaps enlighten us about what theories exist now about the cycle of tourism, and when we talk about sustainable tourism, what does that really meant? So one question I hope is meaningful for you students is that understanding the events that triggered tourism, and how does this history compare to Butler's theoretical stages of the cycle of tourism, the evolution of tourism. When Butler actually documented that theory in 1980, it was theoretical. Change over time is not often documented, so we're only now really using empirical research to test Butler's theory. The second question is education tourism, a possible pathways for sustainable renewal rather than unsustainable growth and ultimate decline. And then third, why is our partnership with Royal Roads significant for community resilience, and what have we learned? And we are still learning, but I can't emphasize how important this partnership is. So in 2000, this West Coast region that I'm going to be describing was designated a UNESCO Biosphere Region. But the story of how that was designated is very complicated. What you see before you are two maps. On the left-hand side, these are the territories of 5 First Nations. These are their unceded territories of Heshkwit, Ahousaht, Clayoquot, Toquot, and Huulthii. These are salmon people whose homes and whose whole tradition of culture really exist in the landscape of these fjord coastal systems. These are magnificent temperate coastal rainforests dominated by cedar and hemlock, and those fjord systems that you see are much like in Norway or Scotland, with deep fjords, steep slopes, and rushing rivers, and their habitat for salmon and just a magnificent abundance of biodiversity. And the designation is superimposed on those unceded territories. So the map you have on the right hand is the boundary of the UNESCO Biosphere Reserve. The green areas are various types of and degrees of protected areas. And so what you see is the Biosphere Reserve designation is just merely a construct, and really what we're talking about are these traditional territories of the Nuu-chah-nulth people. But the UNESCO Man the Biosphere program plays a very important role in this landscape. And it started in 1971. The whole Man in the Biosphere program started as a means to unite communities in peace and cooperation through education, science and culture and communication to safeguard the sustainability of natural and managed ecosystems. So that designation has a mandate, a purpose, and a vision of how we're moving forward. Interestingly enough, one of the pivot points in all of this is Mears Island. So Mears Island, that arrow points to a sacred landscape in the Clayoquot Nation, and that landscape is a ancient old growth forested mountain. It's an island, and it was designated as it was targeted for a complete clear cut of intensive harvesting of forestry products in the late 1980s. And this was a huge point of contested concern, both by the Nuu-chah-nulth people and local residents. And it's important because that pivot point really continues today. This Mears Island is a reminder that the trajectory we were on in terms of industrial scale logging was not compatible with the values of the Nuu-chah-nulth, and it's not compatible with the values of the UNESCO Biosphere. So tourism, from my perspective, often is looked upon as an economic sector. But in the context of Clayoquot Sound, tourism was a pivot point that emerged out of a whole history of events. And some of these events in this timeline that are really important to point out is that the scale of industrialization that happened on the West Coast was also layered upon the type of policy that the Indian Act implemented to prevent Nuu-chah-nulth people from engaging in economic activities. It confined people to very small reserves, so they no longer were active players in the whole evolution of the landscape. Rather, industrial scale logging, industrial scale fishing were coming in and exploiting these territories. That all escalated with the Second World War. This part of the world was a key factor in supplying canned salmon, plywood. Those were all resources that required high-scale production, and a lot of it was extracted from this part of the world. So the whole cycle of evolution towards economy was not headed towards tourism until the Clayoquot and local residents actually put some significant civil disobedience into play and resisted that pathway of development and said no. And there's this was the history that Dr. White recorded for his PhD thesis. And the War in the Woods was a 10-year phase of resistance against this kind of logging activity in an effort to save Clayoquot Sound in its pristine environment. And that was the trigger for both the UNESCO Biosphere Reserve designation as well as a pivot point to a new economy pathway or a new economic pathway, which was tourism. So it wasn't tourism by design, it was tourism as an alternative to have a livelihood when in the absence of industrial logging. So the shared conservation values arose from shared conflict. And this is a photograph taken outside of the legislature here in Victoria, and that's a Nuu-chah-nulth welcoming figure. And so the scale of resistance, the scale of protest was enormous, and it catalyzed a significant change. And part of that change was a whole shift in how we look at forestry practices, but it was also, in our part of the world, a shift to really including Indigenous knowledge in how we view what is appropriate practice in Nuu-chah-nulth places. And so the Clayoquot Scientific Panel was a key document, and I think it's really important to remember that tourism just wasn't kind of helicoptered in as an idea. It was hoped to be a sustainable pathway that could help us merge Nuu-chah-nulth values of place with local people's livelihoods. So hopefully this will work. I just want to give you a sense of the magnificence of Clayoquot Sound. So you can imagine yourselves there and imagine why people would fight for 10 years to protect the old growth temperate rainforest. Yeah.
The Clayoquot Sound Biosphere Reserve encompasses 350,000 hectares on the western coast of Vancouver Island and includes some of the largest tracts of intact coastal temperate rainforest left in North America. The Biosphere Reserve is home to about 3,200 people who live in either the principal town of Tofino or in the surrounding First Nations communities. In Clayoquot Sound, the community organization that supports the Biosphere Reserve designation is the Clayoquot Biosphere Trust.
I think that Clayoquot Sound is an excellent site for a biosphere reserve because we have a history of doing things differently. We really are communities that have experience with forestry and fishing, and yet we know that there's always a way to make improvements. So I think that the role of the Biosphere designation is in bringing people together to have conversations about sustainable development and to let that designation really guide our actions as individuals and as organizations and businesses and communities on a daily basis.
So there you have some visuals. So I'm the research director for the Clayoquot Biosphere Trust, and it's a real privilege to work for this organization, and sustainability is really what we're aiming to achieve, but we do that in collaboration with all our community organizations and the partnership we have with Royal Roads, which was part of the theme of today's talk, is a really essential link we have to really keep that conversation going about what really does it mean to be sustainable. And one of the frameworks we use is now the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And so it's thought largely within the kind of Biosphere Reserve network that tourism is compatible with sustainable development if done in a certain manner within the carrying capacity of the social ecological system. So interestingly, you'll see several campaigns throughout the world that really use biosphere reserves as a tourism attraction. So I think that that's a really important question for us. Is tourism compatible with a biosphere reserve designation? It's thought to be yes, but how is a big question. So I think that's relevant for this question of Butler's theoretical stages of tourism evolution. And you know this literature perhaps better than I do. But what's interesting, this is a growth curve. Butler was a geographer, and cycles of growth are very useful tools to look at growth of the life cycle of businesses, the life cycle of ecosystems. I mean, this kind of growth cycle is even common in the social ecological resilience literature and adaptive management literature. And what it means is that you go through stages of, that initial phase where you're investing in the concept, and then it's taking off and it's success, and you see that asymptote, you see that that rising curve. That's usually a sign of growth. And the question is, does exponential growth continue, or are there limits to growth? This is a key question for sustainability. And what Butler was saying is tourism is very vulnerable to exceeding the carrying capacity of the place in which people are initially attracted to. And Butler suggested that there are 6 possible avenues that you can take if you, in fact, exceed that time period in which tourism is a valuable and successful economy. And once you pass that, it could actually be undermining or eroding the very systems, the very experience that initially attracted tourists to that location. So in other words, tourism has the potential to create an unsustainable economic pathway. And in that case, it's creating its own decline, potentially. So Butler had several suggestions of what might happen. You could decline and in fact, no longer have a tourism sector. You could renew, and in fact, Butler points to large investments of things like Disneyland or casinos, that whole investment of infrastructure and attractions as renewing some sort of tourism growth cycle. But another pathway that I'm going to talk about is actually this question of, can we invest in tourism in a way that actually lifts up or builds some aspect of community rather than undermining the social, cultural, and ecological system. Now, interestingly, look at this curve. This is the growth curve of tourism in Clayoquot Sound over the last 15 years. And certainly with the whole crisis or conflict regarding the forestry industry and the war in the woods, there was the world's eyes were on us in Clayoquot Sound. It had the unintended consequence, the conflict had the unintended consequence of having consistent and continued media attraction. And all of that attraction was almost free publicity to come see this place. And tourism really took off after this cycle of conflict. And by the late 1990s and early 2000, visitor counts in the Pacific Rim National Park documented between 600 and 700,000 visitors. There is an error there in some double counting because it's often car counting. But the methodology just shows an incredible cycle of growth, particularly in the last 5 years. Our local resident population is around 5,000 people. This graph is showing over 1 million visitors per year. I mean, just think of the scale that we're talking about. So it does look somewhat similar to Butler's growth curve, does it not? Where do you think we're going to go from here? Interestingly, over the last 20 years, once you start looking at change in livelihoods, you can really see this flip. On the left hand of this chart, you see what at one time would have been the actual number of fishing and forest harvesting occupations, and now 20 years later that has flipped to the right hand. Well, not the same individuals, but that is now we're seeing that employment, or that part of our labor force is in the hospitality sector. Families moved away. Livelihoods were lost as a result of this conflict. It has taken 20 years almost. I mean, we're at 19 years since the designation of the biosphere, but it has taken time for the community to even heal, just given that huge economic loss. And shifting to tourism has not been a very quick shift. It's been an evolution, and people have left and new people have come. So it's really important, I think, when you're talking about tourism, to think about the dynamic changes over time. It's not stagnant, and this even shows it's a complete shift in our labor force. This is also some trend analysis of change over time. And anytime you see this many curves going up and one key curve going down, which is our salmon population, it's something to pay attention to. These are indicators of change in our unemployment, changes in the living wage. Living wage is a calculation we do every 2 years to estimate how much money you'd have to earn per hour in order just to have a bare bones lifestyle in Tofino for the average family of 4, 2 working parents and 2 children. So our living wage is the 3rd highest in British Columbia, and it's almost equal to urban areas like Vancouver and Victoria. So cost of living is very high, and the living wage you need to earn to live in Tofino or in any community in Clayoquot Sound is going up. We're seeing the number of visitors growing up, as I showed you that growth curve. And we're also seeing the percentage of labor employed in the hospitality sector is going up. So our actual diversification is going down. Most livelihoods depend on tourism now in our part of the world. And I don't know how we would, how successful we would be if there was some crash in the financial situation, or if there was some crisis that prevented people from traveling to our part of the world. But what we are seeing, interestingly, is a shift where early in the curve of tourism, we had a lot of visitors from the United States and Europe. Now we're seeing more and more visitors from within British Columbia. But the point being is we need to diversify our economy. We're very dependent just on tourism at this point, and that's not sustainable. So education tourism is a question. It's an experiment. It's something that we hope is a pathway of tourism that can attract a different type of visitor, one that's not coming just to consume place and be served an experience that is strictly an attractant or an attraction for tourists. Rather, we're hoping people are attracted to be in this spectacular part of the world, and they're interested in staying a bit longer, taking courses, learning more about the people and the place, and by doing so, adding more value both to our economy and to their lived experience. So we have a question: can we attract a different type of visitor to strengthen local knowledge and stewardship capacity? So in 2014, as Dr. Bird mentioned, we had an opportunity. Dr. White, myself, and Kathy Thick had an opportunity to conduct an education tourism market development strategy for the West Coast. And it was one of those moments, a real pleasure, and it was a very creative endeavor. We also we thought about a target market selection that would achieve these economic goals as well as provide community benefits. This is more in the line of what you would call a social enterprise. This is not just an economic profit exercise. This is about what market segments do we know within tourism could actually meet these goals. So we weren't looking necessarily for profit, but we wanted no net loss. We wanted stipends for local knowledge holders, so something just below a minimum wage. We wanted something that would value local knowledge, including indigenous knowledge and local experiential knowledge. We wanted a wide distribution channel for local product supply. So we didn't just want to limit it to certain attractions. We wanted every community to have an opportunity to engage in education tourism. And we wanted to connect local education organizations. They were going to be the key suppliers of the product. And as far as community benefits, community knowledge was a key part of this. We didn't want to pay educators to come in and offer courses. It was more, let's use the knowledge we have, celebrate that, and really make this an opportunity to learn from people who live here. So long-term partnerships and knowledge sharing region-wide were a goal, and more education services, we had the thought, would also provide more local benefits. In essence, we hypothesized that this could create a learning culture, and by that way generate not only economic growth, but cultural growth, capacity, community cohesion. These are aspects of community resilience. So we developed these guiding principles. Any product that we kind of tested in our kind of our market choice of market segment would have to also align with these principles. So co-learning, community reciprocity, local knowledge keepers, learning networks, sense of stewardship, outdoor learning environment, holistic learning, community immersion, and fostering cultural safety and sharing. So again, these two mixes of economic value, community benefits, and we literally plotted our markets somewhere on these axes. So high school trips could potentially bring high economic value if local students were staying in one of our hotels or hostels. University field schools, a little bit lower budget, but very large community benefit in return. Adult learning, somewhere in the kind of 50-50 side, a little bit of each, and elder hostel, equally economic value, community benefit split. We, as part of the study, developed kind of the ideal mix as far as what kind of products could be developed for these target markets. And after the study was done, we leveraged the research to apply for another grant and develop a website and a whole platform for hosting education programs online. So the sense is any visitor who was already interested, already attracted to this part of the world could go onto an online calendar and find out what courses were being taught at that time during their holiday. So now we'll see if, here's this is about a 15-minute video just on the story of the West Coast Nest, the education platform that we created as a result of the market development strategy. Bending the curve is the
organization. The West Coast Nest is a collaboration of local communities and local organizations, so it's really open to anyone on the West Coast who sees an opportunity to either offer their knowledge or to learn.
I would say the West Coast Nest is a virtual and physical hub for finding out all of the great teachings, courses, learnings, and opportunities for people to have a really deep, rich, meaningful experience while they're visiting Tofino and Clayoquot Sound and the entire region. I've been involved in the last few years of some of the thinking and creating and visioning behind the West Coast Nest, so I feel really privileged, but we're building on the shoulders of many people who've come before us who have always had this vision about Tofino and the West Coast region being a place where people can come to learn as part of their tourism experience or just as part of their life experience and traveling around the world.
I love to teach and I love to learn, and there's something so magnanimous about this place as it's so complex. There's so many layers. I continually humbled when I think I actually understand what's going on, and only to peel back another layer and to find out I actually don't know what's going on. It's multifaceted. So I think this place really has attracted me and my family because it is a place of learning, and it's a place of humbly continuing to learn. So in that context, it's been a dream of mine to create learning opportunities in place, in communities, where we really create that feedback loop where we're learning outside, we're learning from our exploration into forests, marine ecosystems, and we're having those conversations. And that iterative way of learning is how we actually expand our awareness of a living social ecological system. So that's my dream, is to bring more and more learning opportunities here and more conversations. 6 years ago, there was a group of us that came together in the community and just asked ourselves, what is it going to take to create higher learning here in a more formalized manner? How do we create the conditions so that our local youth could take university level courses here and beyond, professional development? So for about 6 years, there's been this incubating conversation, and I've been part of that conversation, and now we're starting to see fruits of that conversation emerge. This particular group that met 6 years ago and formed the Clayoquot Tofino Higher Learning Committee, we had many conversations, and we all agreed we didn't want just a conventional way of learning where universities would sort of airdrop their predefined courses and teach within closed doors and then literally take all of that learning away. Instead, we talked about different principles. We talked about lifting everyone up in a learning culture. We talked about even changing how we view Western learning styles and being far more open to Nuu-chah-nulth traditions of learning and the Hahopa.
I was asked to join as a Clayoquot member. What does Indigenous education mean, or what does Indigenous knowledge mean, and how can that contribute to the project and the learning here? What would I hope to see in the future? What I would hope to see is that, the idea of the West Coast Nest is to bring education here. And yet our Indigenous peoples have lived here for so long that there's so much knowledge, so much history, that I would really like to see our own education system be lifted up and sharing at the same level of the offering. So to really see more of our Indigenous knowledges, our culture, our way of living here on the coast being taught, being shared, and so that others can also learn. So for me, being away for 10 years at university and doing my degrees, I understood how hard it was to be away from home, to be away from your family, to be away from your cultural support, your spiritual support, all of the things that a person needs, especially anybody, but Kuas that needs that connection to home, land, community, to strengthen their Klimaksti so that they can do well in whatever it is that they're training for.
This vision is manifesting slowly and steadily, and I'm really encouraged by the changes and the shifts we're starting to see from a time when people didn't really understand what we were speaking about when we talked about a learning economy. And now understanding that this is something that is real and that honors the experience and the knowledge that people on the West Coast have to share, as well as the opportunity to work with institutions, schools, colleges, universities, and others to bring people out to the West Coast and have what we hope would be a really transformative learning experience. I think it's fair to say we've experienced a few transformations here on the West Coast. So first, with settlers coming and using an extraction economy to sustain themselves, and logging and fishing and those kinds of activities that went on. And then the transformation again in the 80s and 90s with truly collaborating with First Nations and beginning to tell the world that this extraction economy isn't a sustainable future for us in Clayoquot Sound, and seeing the growth, incredible growth of the tourism industry. And now I think people in Tofino are asking ourselves, what's next? Is this it? Is this good enough? And I think we're all coming to the realization that tourism is an important part of our economy, and it's managed to help us not do things that we didn't want to do anymore. But we need to deepen this and ensure that it's something that enables our community to come first, and for visitors who come and help us sustain our livelihoods to be part of our livelihoods, but not to change us or to make us someone or someplace that we aren't. So I think the West Coast Nest is a big part of that transformation, and a big part of that deep, rich, meaningful experience that doesn't see us go beyond the physical carrying capacity of the region, the environmental carrying capacity of the region, the social carrying capacity of the region.
We have realized that with over 1 million visitors here on an annual basis, perhaps there's a new way of thinking of hosting learning opportunities where outside learners come join us and we learn together. And together we can reach economies of scale that we might otherwise not be able to attract.
When the idea for the West Coast Nest was first born, my take on it was that we were really looking at diversifying the economy. And it's been through a lot of conversation that we've come to realize that it's more than just diversifying the economy. It's about valuing local residents, about valuing First Nations culture that was here for thousands of years before settlers came. And it's about making sure that our identity remains intact and that we're able to use tourism as a way of sustaining ourselves, but not going beyond what this area can really hold. I think we are embarking on a really important conversation with First Nations about how to honor a culture, a language, a people, without impacting them in ways that we have done in the past. A way of helping people to understand a worldview that's been here in this place for thousands of years. And I think it's a rich, rewarding experience that we could all spend the rest of our lives learning about. And I think I think right now Canada is truly in an era of reconciliation. And if we want to really, really embrace that, then this offers us an experience that is unlike anything else that I can think of.
My name is Rebecca Hurwitz, and I'm the Executive Director of the Clayoquot Biosphere Trust. The West Coast Nest is an online platform for education tourism. So we're marketing the region to prospective learners in hopes that they'll come out here and learn with our local residents. There's a big range of courses already offered on the Nest, including local professional development programs such as Leadership Vancouver Island, There are university field schools in partnership with the University of Victoria and Royal Roads University, for example. And then there are really practical courses such as first aid and outdoor guiding courses like stand-up paddleboarding. People could access the West Coast Nest website from anywhere in the world to learn about local learning opportunities and to register, and then arrive here to learn with and from local people. I would say I've been a learner on the West Coast since I first arrived here. So in my first years as a kayak guide, I really worked to learn as much as I could about the local ecosystems and communities. And I discovered that I'd like to go back to school to learn more. And so I returned to Royal Roads to attend a master's program by distance. And I was able to live on the West Coast and attend courses in Victoria occasionally while learning online. So it was through that experience that I really realized that there's an opportunity to build a greater learning economy on the West Coast. I think one of the things we're learning as a region through the West Coast Nest is to collaborate at a regional scale, so across cultures, across communities, to bring people together with this shared goal.
My name is Nicole Gerbrandt, and I am the Education Coordinator with West Coast Nest. I've been involved with West Coast Nest since June of last year. Since I've been involved, there's been more capacity for West Coast Nest to reach out to our regional partners, local education organizations, businesses, and individuals that want to share their knowledge with visiting learners. So we've been able to connect, and I can get a sense of what programs they're offering that I can help market to people that are wanting to come to the area, and also get a sense of where each person or organization or business sees room for growth within their programming, and hopefully I can work to build links between them. Those are agriculture students from Tamagawa University in Japan, in Tokyo, and they are staying at a satellite campus in Nanaimo for a few months studying at Vancouver Island University, and they are bringing a field trip here to learn about West Coast forests. So I am working with their program coordinator to provide an orientation to their group when they come to the West Coast, to introduce where they are and a little bit about the land and the communities and the services available.
I think the West Coast Nest presents a great opportunity to enhance our community resilience, both in increasing our knowledge within the region, and then in attracting visitors and sort of the kind of visitors that we'd like to see, so that we have a positive impact. Those visitors have a positive impact in the region. I think the goal of sharing knowledge with visitors and locals is to just maximize that knowledge translation, or that knowledge transmission across cultures, across the globe. As a UNESCO designated site, there's a real link in the CBT's mandate to education and sustainability. And so we want to ensure that the visitors that we're attracting have a good match with those values, and that's in keeping with the designation of the Biosphere Reserve. One of the ways that our vision has changed over time is to move away from the idea of a bricks and mortar institution on the West Coast, and to see that it's important to embed the learning within communities, so that we can have that relationship between the learners and the instructors and the knowledge holders. The West Coast Nest is working directly with local knowledge holders and folks who'd like to be offering courses on the West Coast to develop that capacity. And we have some funding to help to develop curriculum and to create background documents and supports that can be used by many different instructors.
At West Coast Nest, we welcome people that are living within the communities within our region that have a skill or knowledge they would like to share, to come and take part, and we can support them in creating a way to communicate it to the outside world, or maybe connect with someone that teaches something similar and set up a retreat or a workshop where we can welcome both people from within our communities to learn the skill, as well as people from outside the region to come and learn that skill with us.
I have a lot of hopes for the next 20 years. This movie's called Bending the Curve because for the last 20 years there has been a shift ever since people stood up and resisted this trajectory of commodity production in our forests and similarly our fisheries. Standing up and resisting that trajectory means that there's been a pause, there's been a gap in that economic cycle. And what we do within that gap is so important. And we've seen the gap fill in somewhat in terms of a shift to tourism as our economic way of making a living here. It's pretty much our only basis of economy right now, and we have over 1 million people. And so bending the curve is about shaping tourism such that we're elongating the visitor's experience. It's no longer a consumption of place and space. It's a participation with people, and it's a participation in a new way of being together. So bending the curve is actually a way of describing this education tourism shift where visitors come and learn with us, stay for a while, get to know us, leave something behind that's contributing to the betterment of our ecology, the betterment of our society. Bending the curve is about us growing forward together in a sustainable way.
So if people are interested, they can reach me at nicole@westcoastnest.org or reach me through my contact information, which is on our website, westcoastnest.org.
This could be possibly the most beautiful place on earth that you have ever visited. And when you come here, you will be absolutely blown away by the ancient coastal temperate rainforest, by the unending views of the Pacific Ocean and the power of the water, the smell of the air, the feel of it on your face. But once you spend a few hours or days or hopefully maybe even weeks here, you'll realize that there are people here underlying all of that environmental surrounding who truly make this place a community. And once you learn why people have moved to Tofino, why people live here, why people have lived here in this region for thousands and thousands of years, you open yourself up to, I think, a new way of looking at things. And I hope you will take that home with you when you go back to wherever you're from.
We've got a glimmer or a glimpse of what we've achieved since our first conceptual idea of education tourism. We're still in the very early stages of Butler's growth cycle, and we're learning a great deal. And one of the, that's the final piece of this talk, is just to reflect quite quickly on what we've learned. And partnerships are a really key element, I think, of what we're learning, both internally within our own communities, building partnerships with local organizations, with our local knowledge holders, but the partnership with universities and specifically Royal Roads University is really an integral part of these properties of community resilience. The literature on community resilience is just in its early stages of development as well. This is kind of a cosmic diagram from the work of Fikret Berkes and Helen Ross. They started defining the elements of community resilience in 2013. Things like enabling leadership, mobilizing local knowledge and skills, a sense of agency where you're directing the pathway of your own future. Those are all key aspects of what is emerging on the West Coast as we engage more in education tourism. Just as a flash, I mean, some of the significant events over the years with Royal Roads University started in 2012 when I started teaching with Royal Roads University, and the School of Environment and Sustainability supported an application for a SHIRK collaboration, and that funding from that research supported the film you just watched. In 2014, we talked about the collaboration with the School of Tourism on our market development strategy. In 2016, with the guidance of Dr. Rick Kuhl and the School of Environment and Sustainability, the Environmental Education and Communication program launched our first pilot residency. It was almost a week of learning within the Huulthii community of Hitatsu. And so taking university students humbly living in their gym in tents and making coffee in the morning with elders dropping by and saying hello, and it was bringing knowledge, a culture of knowledge and learning to the heart of a community, and having tough conversations about reconciliation and cultural divide. So teaching university courses in reservation or on reserves, that's unique, and that takes special kinds of people, special kinds of commitment, and a university that's really willing to step into innovation. In 2017, one of the faculty in our School of Environment and Sustainability, Dr. Audrey Dollimore, collaborated with us on a application to NSERC for a promo science grant, and brought scientists to one of our remote communities of Huulthii and taught high school students how to identify phytoplankton, and they're still talking about how to identify phytoplankton. We're continuing to pilot the residency in Environment Education and Communication program. We've taught in 3 different communities. Last year we taught in a Huulthii, and it has lasting effects. It seems like small ripples of change, but this is how we empower local knowledge holders, and we're very grateful for this partnership. So place-based, here's some of the learnings, some of the teachings. Place-based experiential learning is for visiting learners and locals. In my observation, visitors who come and learn and have locals in those courses, they're just thrilled with the experience. It's just a unique, once-in-a-lifetime kind of learning opportunity. Culturally safe learning requires respect for the past, present, and future. When we're learning with Nuu-chah-nulth Elders, they're often teaching us how to respect Nuu-chah-nulth culture, but it applies universally across cultures, how we respect one another's world views, how we start talking about protocols when you're visiting a place. How do you behave well when you're a visitor? So environmental education is learning with people in place, just that humility to ask permission to go into a place and see what magic emerges when people feel your willingness to learn. On the left, or my left, that's actually Rick Cool right there, one of the elders in Ucluelet that hosted a traditional salmon feast as just a spontaneous gift to the students. That's not something we orchestrated or planned. It was by the relationship that evolved. And similarly on the right, last year in a Huulthii, these students were just equally so engaged in learning. They were gifted a party one night by one of the elders who made a birthday cake for the students, and just this reciprocal respect and appreciation of culture and people and place. Scientific research can be coupled with teaching monitoring skills to youth. On the left, we have the Vector. This was the expedition Dr. Audrey Dollimore brought to Tofino and Ucluelet last fall with another promo science NSERC grant. We have Dr. Leslie King and Dr. Audrey Dollimore, who again brought scientists who are helping us develop skills for water quality monitoring. And we're learning so much more about our kind of the conditions of our ocean environment. And young students are very engaged in science and have hope because they're bringing their teachings to us, and it's a reciprocal opportunity to learn and inspire a culture of learning. And again, this was in a Huulthii and learning how to identify different types of marine plastic and leaving skills that these high school students can continue to develop. And learning from Nuu-chah-nulth Elders, we have all appreciated what a gift that is. It's something that can't be rushed, and we're still learning the protocols of how to create learning opportunities with the elders, but it's wisdom that when we are privileged to experience, it is truly a gift. And part of the learning experience, what we're finding is visitors are really excited to learn how to be better stewards. So that's part of the new attractive experience, is how to be in place, learn with locals, and learn how to be a better participant in our beautiful place of the world. We're also learning that education tourism allows us to test innovation. So the course that I mentioned, Environmental Education Communication, we're testing new curriculum and innovative ways of teaching that every year. And this is also an example of when people are visiting and engaged in learning, spontaneous workshops are happening. This was a workshop on mini homes, and that's actually something that could contribute to our housing crisis if we're expanding the options and testing solutions and using education tourism as an avenue to do that. It's a win-win. And ultimately, respecting our unceded Nuu-chah-nulth territories is key. Understanding and remembering the history of settlement is really part of this whole experience that is kind of key to that relationship building. Knowing from where we've come and where we're going together is really important. And it's very active in Tofino. The Clayoquot Nation honored the European settlers this past fall with a totem pole, and this totem pole really represents the conservation values of the Huulthii, the Huulthii, the traditional elders, the traditional leaders in the Clayoquot Nation are at the top of this totem, holding us all, and it's really symbolizing the values that we must all hold together for the benefit of our grandchildren, and it's our grandchildren at the bottom of the totem, mixed cultural values moving forward together. And I truly believe that's the pathway forward for both tourism and the UNESCO Biosphere Region. Thank you.